The package was delivered at 3:42 p.m. By 3:44, it was gone. Nobody ran. Nobody hid. The HOA president just smiled and said she was protecting the community. 3 days later, she walked into the board meeting wearing white gloves, trying to hide the blue bank-grade dye stained into her skin. That was the moment everyone realized. The thief wasn't breaking the rules. The thief was the one writing them. When I first moved into Pinewood Heights, I thought I'd found exactly what I was looking for. Quiet streets, trimmed lawns, neighbors who waved but didn't pry. The kind of place where nothing ever seemed out of place. Not a car parked crooked, not a trash bin left out too long, not a single blade of grass taller than its neighbor. It wasn't just clean, it was managed. Every house followed the same unspoken rhythm. Lawns mowed on schedule, porch lights turned on at dusk. Seasonal decorations rotated in and out like clockwork. In October, pumpkins appeared. In November, they disappeared. Nothing lingered longer than it was supposed to. At first, I found that comforting. After years of living in places where nobody cared about anything beyond their own front door, Pinewood Heights felt orderly, predictable, safe. I told myself that was the point of an HOA, to keep chaos at bay. But order, I would later learn, has a way of hiding things. I'd been there just over 2 months when I first met Karen. She was the HOA president, had been for years, according to the neighbors. You could tell by the way people deferred to her, stepping aside on sidewalks, lowering their voices when she walked past, smiling a little too quickly. Karen always looked put together, hair pulled tight, clothes pressed, shoes spotless. She had the posture of someone used to being listened to, and the calm confidence of someone who expected things to go her way. When she introduced herself, she used words like community standards and shared responsibility. She talked about Pinewood Heights the way someone talks about a carefully tended garden, something that needed constant attention, or it would quickly fall into ruin. I didn't see anything wrong with that, not at the time. In fact, I remember thinking she was exactly the kind of person you wanted running an HOA. Professional, organized, firm, but polite. Looking back now, that should have been my first warning. Because people who believe they are protecting something precious often convince themselves that any action is justified. Life in Pinewood Heights settled into a routine quickly. I worked during the day, came home in the evening, took walks around the neighborhood, nodded at familiar faces. I attended one HOA meeting out of obligation, mostly listening as they discussed landscaping budgets and mailbox regulations. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. Which is why, when my first package disappeared, my reaction wasn't anger, it was confusion. The notification came through my phone at 3:42 in the afternoon. Package delivered, left at front door. I was still at work when I saw it. Just a small hit of anticipation. The kind you get when you know something you ordered has finally arrived. Nothing expensive, nothing urgent, just something I'd been waiting for. I didn't rush home. There was no reason to. When I pulled into my driveway a little after 6, the neighborhood looked exactly the way it always did. Calm, quiet, predictable. A couple of porch lights already on. Someone watering their lawn down the street. No signs of trouble. I walked up to my front door and stopped. The welcome mat was empty. No box, no slip. No sign anything had ever been there. I stood there longer than I probably should have, keys still in my hand, running through explanations that didn't involve theft. Maybe the delivery driver left it at the wrong house. Maybe a neighbor grabbed it for safekeeping. Maybe it was around the side of the house. Reasonable thoughts. The kind you cling to before admitting something's wrong. I checked around the porch. Nothing. Inside, I set my keys down and told myself not to overreact. Pinewood Heights wasn't the kind of place where packages just vanished. This was a neighborhood where people followed rules, where violations were noted down to fractions of an inch. If anything, someone here would be too careful. I remembered the HOA email that had gone out the week before, a polite notice about increased vigilance and community safety. It mentioned that, due to recent concerns about deliveries, HOA volunteers might temporarily secure packages left unattended. At the time, I'd barely skimmed it. Now, it echoed in my head. I decided to wait, to give it a day. If someone had picked it up to be helpful, they'd reach out. That night passed quietly. So did the next morning. By the following afternoon, there was still no message, no knock on the door, no email, no note. That was when I opened my laptop. Not because I was angry, because I wanted clarity. The doorbell camera app loaded quickly. The footage was clean and clear, time-stamped down to the second. At 3:42 p.m., the delivery driver walked up, set the box on the mat, scanned it, and left. Professional, routine. For the next 2 minutes, nothing happened. Then someone entered the frame. They didn't rush, didn't look around nervously. They moved with purpose, like they belonged there. They picked up the package and walked away. I paused the video. The person wasn't a stranger. They were wearing an HOA hoodie. My first reaction wasn't outrage. It was disbelief. Because if this was theft, it wasn't sloppy. It wasn't desperate. It was controlled, quiet, sanitized. It looked official. I replayed the clip again, slower this time. Studied the posture, the way the person carried the box, the direction they headed when they left, toward the center of the neighborhood, toward authority. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not anger, not fear, but a colder realization. If someone could walk onto my property, take my package in broad daylight, and do it wearing HOA gear, then this wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't random. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair, staring at nothing. At the time, I still believed there was an explanation that didn't involve corruption, that someone had misunderstood a rule, that things would sort themselves out if I asked the right questions. I hadn't yet learned how dangerous that assumption was, because in Pinewood Heights, the rules weren't just guidelines, they were weapons, and the people writing them knew exactly how to use them. The next morning, I did what any reasonable person would do. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't post online. I didn't call the police. I emailed the HOA. The message was short and polite. I explained that a package had been marked as delivered but never arrived. I asked if anyone from the association might have picked it up for safekeeping, and if so, how I could retrieve it. I expected a delay. HOA offices were never fast. What I didn't expect was how quickly Karen responded. Her reply came less than an hour later. She thanked me for reaching out, said she appreciated my patience, reassured me that Pinewood Heights took resident security very seriously. She reminded me of the recent notice about package theft concerns, and explained that volunteers had been asked to temporarily secure unattended deliveries when possible. "It's all part of protecting the community," she wrote. There it was again. That phrase, protecting the community. She told me she would look into my situation personally and get back to me. The email was perfectly written. Warm without being familiar. Professional without sounding cold. The kind of message that made you feel silly for worrying in the first place. I remember leaning back in my chair and thinking, this is probably just a mix-up. That's the thing about authority when it's presented calmly. You want to believe it. A day passed, then another. No follow-up. I sent a second email, even more careful than the first. Just checking in. No pressure, no assumptions. This time, the response took longer. Karen apologized for the delay, said things had been busy, reiterated that she was reviewing the matter, asked for my patience. Still polite, still reasonable, still no package. By the end of the week, the issue had quietly shifted from inconvenience to something heavier. Not because of the missing item, but because of the silence that followed. In a place as regulated as Pinewood Heights, nothing stayed unaccounted for. Every violation had a form. Every request had a paper trail. Every resident interaction was documented, except this. I started to wonder if that was intentional. That weekend, I took a walk around the neighborhood, partly to clear my head, partly to see if anyone else had experienced the same thing. I didn't ask directly, I listened. People talked about lawn care schedules, about upcoming board meetings, about how on top of things Karen was. One neighbor told me, without irony, that Pinewood Heights ran so smoothly because Karen didn't let small problems turn into big ones. I nodded along, saying nothing, because something about that sentence stuck with me. Didn't let small problems turn into big ones, or didn't let them be seen at all. That night, I checked the doorbell footage again. Watched the person in the HOA hoodie pick up my package. Not hurried, not cautious, just certain. Whoever it was believed they had every right to be there, and that meant one of two things. Either they were acting under direct instruction, or they were confident that no one would question them. Both possibilities pointed in the same direction, upward. The second package arrived 10 days later. This one mattered more. It wasn't extravagant, but it wasn't cheap either. Something I needed for work. Something I'd specifically scheduled delivery for on a weekday afternoon, hoping to minimize the risk of another mix-up. At 2:18 p.m., my phone buzzed. Package delivered, left at front door. I didn't feel anticipation this time. I felt tension. I left work early. When I pulled into my driveway just after 4, I already knew what I was going to see, or rather, what I wasn't. The porch was empty. I didn't stand there this time, didn't look around, didn't make excuses for what had happened. I went straight inside and opened the camera app. The footage loaded smoothly. At 2:18, the delivery driver arrived, placed the box on the mat, scanned it, and left. 2 minutes later, the frame changed. Someone walked into view from the side of the house. They were wearing the same HOA hoodie. I paused the video and leaned closer to the screen. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to pick up details. The hood was pulled up. The person's face mostly obscured, but the body language was familiar now. The same deliberate pace, the same confidence, the same lack of hesitation. They picked up the box and turned away, heading down the walkway. I let the video play. They didn't look at the camera. They didn't look around. They didn't need to. I rewound the clip and watched it again, this time focusing on where they went after leaving my porch. The camera caught just enough of the path to show the direction, toward the inner loop of the neighborhood, toward the houses closest to the HOA offices. I sat there longer than I realized, watching the same 30 seconds on repeat. This wasn't Karen, and somehow that made things worse. If it had been her, I could have confronted the issue head on, asked questions, forced explanations. But this was structure, delegation, distance. I thought about Karen's emails, about the language she used, about how carefully she avoided specifics, how everything was framed as procedure, not decision, volunteers, security, community standards, words that softened responsibility while expanding authority. That night, I didn't email the HOA. I didn't post anything. I didn't even tell anyone what had happened. Instead, I opened a notebook and wrote down what I knew. 2 packages, 2 deliveries, 2 disappearances, same hoodie, same timing, same direction of travel, and one constant presence hovering over all of it. Karen wasn't taking packages herself. She didn't need to. She'd built a system where other people did it for her, quietly, obediently, believing they were enforcing rules instead of breaking the law. That realization changed everything, because it meant I wasn't dealing with a thief. I was dealing with something far more dangerous. A person who understood power well enough to never touch the evidence themselves. And if that was true, then asking questions wasn't going to fix this. Following the rules wasn't going to fix this. Whatever came next, it would have to expose the system itself, not just the person at the top. I closed the notebook and set it aside. For the first time since moving into Pinewood Heights, I stopped thinking like a resident and started thinking like an investigator. Once I accepted that Karen wasn't taking the packages herself, the picture became clearer and more disturbing. People don't act with that kind of confidence by accident. They act that way when they believe they're protected. The hoodie wasn't a disguise, it was a uniform. I started paying closer attention to the small things I'd ignored before. The maintenance schedules posted on the HOA bulletin board, the unmarked pickup truck that cruised the neighborhood twice a week, the man I'd seen trimming hedges near the clubhouse, fixing sprinklers, hauling bags of mulch. Middle-aged, quiet, kept his head down, always working. I'd nodded at him a dozen times without ever really seeing him. His name was Eric. I learned that by accident, standing near the mailboxes one evening when Karen stopped to talk to him. I wasn't eavesdropping. Not intentionally, but in Pinewood Heights, voices carried. Karen spoke in that same calm, managerial tone she used in emails. Eric listened, nodded, and said very little. What caught my attention wasn't what she said. It was how he reacted. He stood straighter when she spoke, shoulders tight, hands still, like someone used to being corrected. Later that week, I saw him again, this time wearing the HOA hoodie, this time walking with purpose toward a house down the block. Not mine. I didn't record anything. I didn't confront him. I just watched. And I realized something important. Eric wasn't acting like a criminal. He was acting like an employee following instructions. That distinction mattered. A few days later, opportunity presented itself in the most ordinary way possible. I was taking out my trash when Eric pulled up in the HOA truck across the street. He stepped out, glanced around, and started unloading equipment. We were the only two people outside. I hesitated. Then I walked over. I didn't accuse him. I didn't mention packages. I just made small talk. Weather, the condition of the sprinklers, how often the HOA rotated crews. He answered politely, cautiously, the way someone does when they're used to residents complaining. When I finally mentioned the missing deliveries, I framed it carefully. "Must be a headache for you guys," I said, "dealing with all that." He paused, just for a second. Then he nodded and said, "Yeah, it's part of the job." That pause told me everything. I didn't push. I thanked him for his time and walked back to my house. But from that moment on, I stopped seeing Eric as a suspect. I saw him as leverage. Over the next week, I noticed more details. Karen always spoke about procedures, never about decisions. Instructions were phrased as reminders, orders were framed as policies, and Eric carried them out. Quietly, efficiently, without question. Until one afternoon, when I found him sitting in the HOA truck, engine off, staring at the steering wheel. He looked tired. I approached slowly, keeping my voice low. "You ever feel like you're stuck in the middle?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he sighed. "She says it's temporary," he said, "that it's about keeping things clean, organized." I didn't ask who she was. I didn't need to. "She calls them violations," he continued. "Packages left unattended, improper deliveries. She tells me to secure them before they become a problem." "And if you don't?" I asked. He finally looked at me. "I've got 2 kids," he said, "and this job barely covers rent." There it was, the missing piece. Eric wasn't stealing. He wasn't profiting. He wasn't even choosing. He was doing what people with power had always done to people without it, redefining wrongdoing as responsibility and obedience as virtue. Karen didn't need accomplices. She needed compliance. I thanked him for being honest and walked away before the conversation could go any further. I didn't want to trap him, not yet. But I went home knowing 2 things for certain. First, the system Karen had built depended on people like Eric, believing they had no alternative. And second, if that system ever came under real scrutiny, it wouldn't be Eric who collapsed. It would be the person who gave the orders. I opened my notebook that night and added a new line beneath the others. Hoodie equals enforcement. Karen equals authorization. That distinction would matter later. Because when the truth finally came out, I wanted it clear who was acting under pressure and who was acting with intent. And for the first time since this began, I felt something shift. Not anger, not fear, but certainty. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was mapping the chain of command. And chains, no matter how polished they look, always break at the weakest lie. Once I understood how the system worked, I made a conscious decision. I stayed quiet. No emails, no posts, no accusations. I wanted to see what Karen would do next. It didn't take long. The first letter arrived on a Monday afternoon, tucked neatly into my mailbox like a bill. Official HOA letterhead. My name typed cleanly at the top. Notice of violation. Lawn height exceeds approved standard, measured at 4.2 inches. I stood there on the sidewalk reading it twice, then a third time, 4.2 inches. I didn't even own a ruler that precise. I looked at my lawn. It was green, even, indistinguishable from every other lawn on the block. The fine was small, $50. Annoying, but not alarming. At least, that's what I told myself. The second letter arrived the next day. Notice of violation. Trash receptacles visible from the street after 7 p.m. on a non-collection day. $75. I remembered that evening clearly. I'd come home late, taken the bins out, and planned to bring them back in after dinner. I'd forgotten. Once, in 2 months, the third letter arrived before the week was over. Notice of violation. Seasonal decoration not pre-approved per HOA guidelines. $100. It was a single pumpkin. Small, decorative, sitting on my porch like half the other pumpkins in Pinewood Heights. I laid all three letters out on my kitchen table and did the math. $225 in fines for nothing that actually affected anyone. That was when the pattern became undeniable. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was applying pressure. I pulled out the HOA bylaws, the thick booklet I'd skimmed when I bought the house, and started reading them carefully for the first time. The language was slippery. Lawns should not exceed 4 inches. Trash bins are encouraged to be stored out of sight. Seasonal decorations may require approval. Should. Encouraged. May. Words that gave the appearance of order while allowing selective enforcement. I called the HOA office the next morning. Karen answered on the second ring. Her tone was calm, pleasant, almost cheerful. I understand you have some questions about the violations, she said. I do, I replied. I'm trying to understand how these were measured and whether other homes were cited for similar issues. There was a pause. We conduct regular inspections, she said, and we apply the rules equally. Has anyone else been fined for pumpkins? I asked. Another pause. I can't discuss other residents' compliance records, she said smoothly. That information is confidential. Rules are rules, she added. Everyone must comply. When I hung up, I didn't feel angry. I felt boxed in. Because this wasn't about fines. It was about leverage. That evening, Karen posted on the neighborhood app. A short message, friendly on the surface. Reminder that all residents are expected to follow HOA guidelines without exception. We've had recent complaints about property standards not being maintained. Let's keep Pinewood Heights beautiful. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. Within an hour, the post had several likes, a few comments thanking her for keeping standards high. The next day, things shifted. Neighbors who used to wave suddenly found reasons to look away. Conversation stopped when I approached. A couple I'd chatted with regularly crossed the street instead of passing my house. It was subtle, deliberate. Isolation doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly, one small interaction at a time. That night, I sat on my front steps and watched the neighborhood settle into its usual calm. Porch lights flicked on, garage doors closed, everything neat, everything compliant. 2 blocks away, I could see the glow from Karen's house. Warm, inviting, perfect. I realized then that this was the real punishment, not the fines, not the threats, but the message. You don't belong here unless we say you do. I checked my email before going inside. There was a new message from the HOA. HOA account status. Action required. According to the email, my account was now past due. It referenced potential liens, hearings, and further action if payment wasn't received promptly. It cited bylaws I hadn't known existed. Section numbers, legal language, words like arrears and compliance review. All over $225. All over nothing. I read it twice, then sat back and let the reality sink in. Karen wasn't trying to recover money. She was testing me. Testing how far she could push before I folded. Before I paid quietly and learned my place. In Pinewood Heights, the rules weren't designed to create harmony. They were designed to enforce silence. And for the first time, I understood exactly why people like Eric never spoke up. Because the moment you did, the system turned on you. Slowly, methodically, and with a smile. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't pay the fines. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence across a clean page. This is retaliation. I didn't know yet how I would prove it, but I knew something else with absolute clarity. Karen had escalated, which meant I no longer had the luxury of waiting. From this point on, every move would have to be deliberate, documented, and impossible to ignore. The morning after the fines arrived, I did something I'd been avoiding. I talked to my neighbors, not publicly, not in a meeting, not online, quietly. It started with a conversation that wasn't supposed to matter. I was walking back from the mailbox when I ran into Mrs. Turner from 2 houses down, late 60s, widowed, lived alone with a small dog. She walked every morning like clockwork. We'd exchanged pleasantries before, weather, traffic, the price of groceries. That day she asked how I was settling in. I hesitated. Then I said carefully, "Have you ever had a package go missing around here?" She stopped walking, just for a moment, long enough for me to notice. "I thought it was just me," she said. Her voice dropped. Not because anyone was listening, but because that's what you do when you're not sure you're allowed to complain. She told me about a birthday gift for her granddaughter, marked delivered, never arrived. She'd assumed it was a shipping error. When she emailed the HOA, Karen had responded with the same language I'd seen before: reassuring, professional, vague, protecting the community. No follow-up, no package. "I didn't want to make trouble," Mrs. Turner said. "I figured I'd done something wrong." That sentence stayed with me. Later that afternoon, I spoke to Mark and Denise across the street, then a young couple at the end of the block, then a man I recognized from the HOA meeting who always sat in the back and never spoke. Different people, different ages, same story, delivered, gone, explained away. By evening, I'd heard enough to stop calling it coincidence. I didn't write anything down at first. I just listened. People talked about items they needed for work, medication deliveries, groceries, small electronics. Gifts they never replaced because the hassle didn't seem worth it. The amounts were usually modest, $50 here, $100 there, nothing that felt worth fighting an HOA over, which, I realized, was exactly the point. Karen wasn't targeting big losses. She was targeting resignation. That night, I opened my notebook and started listing names. No addresses, no accusations, just initials and dates. By the end of the week, there were 9. 9 people who lived within a few blocks of each other. 9 people who had quietly absorbed the loss and moved on. None of them had filed police reports. None of them had confronted the board publicly. Most of them had blamed themselves. I noticed something else too. Almost all of them were newer residents, people who hadn't built social capital yet, who didn't know which neighbors to trust, who were still learning the rhythms of Pinewood Heights. People like me. When I mentioned the fines I'd received, the reactions were immediate. "Oh, that's how it starts," one man said. Another nodded. "She did that to us when we questioned a landscaping fee." A third shook his head. "If you push back, she pushes harder." The pattern was clear now. The packages weren't the real leverage. The rules were. The packages were just the excuse. That weekend, I met with a few of them away from the neighborhood. A coffee shop a couple miles out, neutral ground. No HOA eyes, no chance encounters. For the first time, people spoke openly. Stories overlapped, details lined up. The same phrases, the same explanations, the same slow fade into silence. One woman mentioned something that made the table go quiet. "I once saw my box in the HOA storage room," she said. "I didn't think much of it at the time." Another said he'd noticed items being loaded into a truck late in the afternoon. Not stolen, collected. I went home that night with a heavy certainty settling in my chest. This wasn't a few bad decisions. It was a method. I sat at my desk and looked at the notebook again. 9 names had become 11. She'd connected us. Then I did something else. I pulled out the folded neighborhood map the HOA had given me when I first moved in. The one with neat property lines, walking paths, and little green icons marking shared spaces. I spread it across my desk and took a red pen from the drawer. One by one, I marked the houses. An X for Mrs. Turner, another for Mark and Denise, another for the young couple at the end of the block. When I finished, I leaned back and stared at the paper. The pattern wasn't random. The houses didn't scatter across Pinewood Heights. They curved, gently, deliberately, along a single route, a path that started near the HOA storage building, cut through the inner loop, and ended less than a block from Karen's house. It was the same route Eric drove every afternoon, the same stretch without community cameras, the same blind spots I'd never noticed before. I traced the line with my finger, following the arc of red X's until they formed something unmistakable, a perimeter, not around the neighborhood, around authority. I sat there longer than I meant to, the map illuminated by the desk lamp, the notebook open beside it. For weeks, this had felt like a series of isolated incidents, bad luck, small problems, individual frustrations. But maps don't lie. Someone had designed this, carefully, efficiently, quietly. I capped the pen and closed the notebook. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what Karen had done. I was seeing where she felt safe, and that was information. The next morning, I took the map with me. Not physically, I didn't need to. The route was already burned into my head. I could trace it from memory now, the way the red X's curved through the neighborhood like a quiet confession. I didn't want drama. I wanted confirmation. So, I did what I should have done from the beginning. I watched, not from behind curtains or with binoculars, just by changing my routine slightly. Different walking times, longer loops, shorter ones. A pause here, a turn there. And I started to notice patterns. Eric's truck appeared almost every afternoon between 3 and 4. Same entrance, same exit, same pace. He followed the route I'd marked, not rigidly but consistently, like muscle memory. He didn't stop at every house, only some. The ones without cameras, the ones with recessed porches, the ones where packages could sit unnoticed for an hour or two. It wasn't sloppy, it was efficient. I still didn't record anything, not yet. I didn't want half evidence. I wanted something that would hold up when the questions finally came. That's when I decided to create a test. I ordered something cheap, $10, nothing I'd miss. I scheduled delivery for a Tuesday afternoon, the same window as the previous losses. But this time, I didn't place the package on my porch. I coordinated with one of the neighbors from my notebook. A quiet guy on the inner loop with a wide-angle camera that covered his driveway and half the sidewalk. He'd lost 2 packages already and was eager to help, as long as we kept it quiet. We placed the box exactly where his deliveries usually landed, visible from the street, easy to access, familiar. Then we waited. At 3:27 p.m., the delivery driver arrived. At 3:31, Eric's truck turned the corner. I wasn't watching from the window. I was inside, listening, counting seconds, letting the pattern play out. Later that evening, we reviewed the footage together. Eric stepped out of the truck wearing the HOA hoodie. No rush, no hesitation. He scanned the porch, picked up the box, and walked back to the vehicle. What happened next mattered. He didn't leave the neighborhood. He drove 2 blocks, turned into the small service lane behind the HOA storage building, and stopped. 10 minutes later, another figure appeared on the camera feed. Karen. She wasn't wearing a hoodie. She didn't need to. She walked with the confidence of someone who belonged there, unlocked the storage door, and waited. Eric handed her the box. No discussion, no paperwork, no pretense, just a transfer. That was the moment the picture snapped into focus. This wasn't theft in the shadows. This was logistics. Eric was the collection arm. Karen was the decision maker. I thanked my neighbor and told him to keep the footage private. We both understood the risk of tipping our hand too early. Back home, I added one more note to the map, a small circle around the HOA storage building. Everything flowed through that point. Over the next few days, I repeated the process twice more with 2 different neighbors. Same result, same route, same handoff. The variables changed. The outcome didn't. I still hadn't confronted anyone. I still hadn't gone public. Because I knew something else now. If Karen suspected she was being watched, she'd shut it down immediately. Change procedures, issue a memo, blame a misunderstanding. What I needed wasn't suspicion. It was proof she couldn't explain away. That meant documenting not just the taking, but the intent. The place where intent lived was the storage room. Packages went in. They didn't come back out. I thought about the HOA rules again. About how often Karen spoke of compliance and safekeeping. How carefully she avoided words like ownership or permission. She'd built herself a gray zone. And gray zones are where accountability goes to die. That night, I sat at my desk with the map spread out beside the notebook. Red X's, arrows, circles, a system revealed piece by piece. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt calm. Because once you understand the structure of something, it stops being overwhelming. It becomes predictable, and predictable systems can be tested. I opened my browser and started researching security marking methods. Not traps designed to embarrass someone on social media. Not glitter bombs or noisemakers. Something quieter. Something precise. Something that would turn the storage room, Karen's safe place, into the point of exposure. By midnight, I'd found what I was looking for. A solution used by banks and armored cars, non-toxic, non-injurious, impossible to wash away quickly. A way to mark what was never meant to be touched. I closed the laptop and looked once more at the map. The route, the blind spots, the perimeter. Karen felt safe inside it. That was about to change. Once I knew where the packages went, the question changed. It wasn't who was taking them anymore. It was how to prove intent. Because in a place like Pinewood Heights, nothing mattered without documentation, not suspicion, not patterns, not even video of a box being picked up for safekeeping. Karen lived in the gray, and gray is where accountability goes to disappear. I spent the next few nights researching, quietly, methodically. Not the kind of traps people post online for clicks, not glitter bombs or noisemakers designed to humiliate someone and rack up views. Those create spectacle. They don't create cases. What I needed was something banks had relied on for decades, something boring, something precise, something that didn't injure anyone but left no room for denial. That's when I found it. Security die packs. They're used in armored vehicles and cash drawers. Pressure-activated cartridges that release indelible dye when someone opens a container without authorization. Non-toxic, non-caustic. Designed to stain skin and clothing for days. Often paired with ultraviolet markers that remain visible even after repeated washing. The language around them mattered. Marking devices, not weapons, not traps. I read case law, Oregon statutes, civil liability discussions. I wasn't interested in being clever. I was interested in being right. The rule was simple. You're allowed to take reasonable steps to protect your property as long as those steps don't cause injury. This wouldn't. It would do something far worse. It would tell the truth. I ordered the components from different places over the course of a week. Nothing flashy, nothing that raised flags. A single-use die pack rated for civilian security. A basic pressure trigger, a compact internal camera, not to capture faces for the internet, but to document sequence and timing. I didn't want this to trigger when the box was moved. I wanted it to trigger when the box was opened. That distinction mattered, because if someone was truly securing packages, they wouldn't need to open them. They'd log them, store them, return them unopened. Opening the box meant ownership. It meant intent. I assembled everything on my garage workbench late at night. Slow work, careful work, the kind that forces you to think through every outcome. I tested the trigger sensitivity 3 times. Too light, and it would fire accidentally. Too heavy, and it might not fire at all. When it finally worked the way I wanted, I closed the box and stepped back. For a long moment, I just stared at it. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't anger. This was exposure. Before I did anything else, I called a lawyer, not to ask permission, to remove doubt. I explained the device, the die, the safeguards, the recording method. She paused, then said, "As long as it's non-injurious and functions as a marking device, you're within your rights. But be prepared. She'll claim it's assault." "I know," I said. "Then document everything," she replied. "And don't say more than you have to." That advice would matter later. The next step was placement. I didn't want the box taken from my porch. That was too predictable. Karen would frame it as another misunderstanding, another security measure. So I chose a location inside the perimeter, one of the houses on the route. A neighbor who already understood what was happening, someone whose porch camera covered the sidewalk, the driveway, and the street beyond. We staged the delivery like any other. Same carrier, same time window, same visibility. Inside the box was the die pack, secured beneath a false bottom. Above it, a cheap retail item, something ordinary, forgettable. I sealed the box carefully, labeled it correctly, left nothing to chance. Then I waited. The plan wasn't to catch Karen sneaking around. The plan was to let her do what she always did. Eric would collect the box, Karen would receive it, and inside the storage room, the place she believed was safest, she would open it. That was where intent lived. I slept poorly the night before delivery, not from nerves, but from anticipation. When you've spent weeks watching a pattern repeat, there's a strange calm that comes with knowing what will happen next. At 2:11 p.m., the delivery notification arrived. At 2:29, Eric's truck appeared. Everything unfolded exactly as before. The pickup, the route, the storage door closing behind them. I didn't rush. I didn't stare at the screen. I let the timeline breathe. At 3:04 p.m., the internal camera activated. The footage was brief, shaky, close, hands peeling back tape, the sound of cardboard tearing. Then a sharp hiss, blue. Not a splash, not a spray. A sudden, unmistakable bloom of color that coated skin and fabric in an instant. The camera caught part of Karen's face, surprise, then anger, then panic. The box tipped over. The image skewed before the stream cut out. I didn't panic. I opened the cloud server dashboard instead. The file was already there, time-stamped, encrypted, complete, safe. I shut my laptop and sat back. It was done. The dye wouldn't wash off, not that night, not the next day. Not before the board meeting she was scheduled to chair. And that was the final piece. Because now, the truth wouldn't just exist on video. It would walk into a room with her. I backed everything up, labeled the files, logged the times. Then I folded the neighborhood map and placed it in the drawer. The perimeter had held long enough. Tomorrow, it would collapse. The morning after the dye pack went off, Pinewood Heights looked exactly the same. Lawns trimmed, cars parked neatly, porches swept clean. That's the thing about systems like this. When something breaks at the top, the surface stays calm for a while. I kept my routine normal. Coffee at the same hour, the same walk past the mailboxes, the same nods to neighbors who weren't quite meeting my eyes anymore. But something had changed. People were watching, not openly, not curiously, carefully. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. A private message from one of the neighbors who'd helped me earlier. She's wearing gloves, no context, no explanation, just that. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. By lunchtime, the rumors had started, the kind that spread without ever being spoken aloud. Someone had seen Karen at the grocery store wearing white gloves. Another said she'd been at the pharmacy buying heavy-duty soap. A third mentioned she'd wrapped one hand in gauze and told the clerk she'd burned herself cooking. None of it sounded convincing. That was the point. Security dye doesn't behave like a spill. It doesn't fade when it's convenient. It doesn't negotiate. It stains. I checked the HOA calendar. The monthly board meeting was scheduled for that evening. 7 o'clock sharp. Same community center. Same folding chairs. Same agenda. I hadn't requested time to speak. Not yet. Around 4, I walked past the HOA office on my usual loop. The blinds were half drawn, the door locked, no sign of activity. I paused long enough to catch my reflection in the glass. I didn't look angry. I didn't look triumphant. I looked prepared. At 6:30, I left my house and headed toward the community center. The air had that early evening stillness that comes before something breaks. Cars lined the street more tightly than usual. People I recognized from my notebook were arriving too. Alone, in pairs, quietly. Inside, the room filled faster than I'd ever seen it. Chairs scraped, voices stayed low. Everyone knew this meeting mattered, even if they didn't know why. Karen sat at the front table, centered between two board members. She was dressed the way she always was. Tailored blazer, composed posture, chin lifted just enough to suggest authority. But the gloves gave her away. White cotton, too clean, too deliberate. When she reached for her water glass, the gloves creased awkwardly at the fingers. She adjusted them, quickly as if hoping no one had noticed. They had. The meeting began with routine items, budget updates, landscaping contracts, a vote on playground maintenance. Karen's voice was steady, but it carried an edge I hadn't heard before. Clipped, precise, rushed. She was trying to move things along. At 7:42, she announced the open forum for resident concerns. My name was called. I stood. The room quieted in a way that felt heavier than silence. I walked to the podium and set my folder down. I didn't look at Karen. I looked at the faces in front of me, familiar now, connected by something unspoken. "I'm here about the missing packages," I said. Karen leaned forward slightly. "We've addressed this before," she said. "The HOA takes theft very seriously." "I'm glad to hear that," I replied, "because what I'm about to show you is serious." I connected my laptop to the projector. The first image filled the screen. A still frame from a porch camera, a package on a mat, a timestamp. The second image followed. The same porch, minutes later. Empty. Murmurs rippled through the room. I didn't rush. "This isn't one incident," I said. "It's a pattern." I advanced the slide. Another still, another porch, another timestamp. Then a map appeared, the neighborhood marked with red X's. Gasps this time, sharp, involuntary. "These homes all reported missing deliveries," I said. "All within a specific route, all over several months." Karen stood abruptly. "This is speculation," she said. "You're implying—" I'm showing documentation, I replied calmly. And now I'd like to show intent. I clicked again. The video played, hands opening a box, cardboard tearing, a sharp hiss, blue. The room reacted as one, a collective intake of breath. I paused the frame just as the dye bloomed across skin. Then I turned, finally, and looked at Karen. Before I go any further, I said, I need to ask you something. She didn't answer. Why are you wearing gloves tonight? The question hung there. Karen swallowed. I injured my hand, she said. It's unrelated. Would you mind removing the glove? I asked. Just the right one. Her eyes flicked to the board members beside her, to the room, to the exit. I don't see how that's relevant, she said. It's very relevant, I replied, because the dye used in this device is bank-grade security marking ink, non-toxic, non-removable for several days, and it stains skin blue. The room went still. I'm asking you, I said gently, to remove the glove. She didn't move. One of the board members cleared his throat. Karen, he said quietly, maybe you should. Her jaw tightened. Slowly she pulled the glove off. Blue, not faint, not smudged, unmistakable. A gasp broke the silence. Karen's face flushed. This is a setup, she said. He assaulted me. He booby-trapped a package. The package was mine, I said. It was taken from a private residence and opened without authorization. The device only activates when the box is opened. I clicked once more. A time-stamped dashboard appeared on the screen. Cloud logs, file hashes, upload confirmation. The footage was uploaded in real time, I said, before the box was ever destroyed. Karen sat down hard. The room erupted. Questions, accusations, voices overlapping. The board chair stood and called for order. It took nearly a minute for the noise to die down. When it did, he looked at Karen. Is any of this untrue? He asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said nothing. The chair exhaled slowly. Effective immediately, he said. You are suspended from the board pending investigation. Karen stood, her remaining glove clenched in her fist. No one spoke as she walked past the rows of chairs, blue hand exposed, eyes fixed straight ahead. When the door closed behind her, the room let out a breath it had been holding for months. I shut my laptop. This wasn't the end, but it was the moment the lie stopped working. The room didn't calm down right away. It fractured. People turned toward one another in disbelief, voices overlapping as the shock gave way to recognition. You could hear it in the tone, not outrage yet, but realization. The sound people make when a story they've been telling themselves quietly stops making sense. The board chair called for order again, harder this time. He asked everyone to take their seats. He asked for phones to be lowered. He asked for patience. No one listened. Because once the truth is visible, procedure feels like delay. Karen's chair at the table sat empty, angled slightly away, as if it had already decided not to belong to her anymore. The white glove she'd clenched was gone. I didn't know where she dropped it, and I didn't care. What mattered was what came next. The board chair finally stood and raised his voice. This meeting is not over, he said, but it is no longer routine. That's when Eric stood up. Not immediately, not dramatically. He rose from the third row, near the aisle. The HOA hoodie was gone. He wore a plain jacket, hands at his sides, posture rigid in a way that told me he'd made this decision before he walked into the room. I need to say something, he said. The room went quiet again, a different quiet this time, expectant, focused. The board chair hesitated, then nodded. State your name for the record. Eric Halverson, he said, maintenance supervisor. Karen wasn't there to stop him anymore. I've been instructed, Eric continued, voice steady but tight, to collect packages left on porches that were labeled as delivery violations. I was told to bring them to the storage room. I was told not to log them. Murmurs spread, sharper now. I didn't keep anything, he said quickly. I didn't sell anything. I didn't open anything. I followed instructions. The board chair leaned forward. Who gave those instructions? Eric swallowed. Karen Bennett. There it was. Not an accusation, a confirmation. She said it was temporary, he went on, that it was about preventing theft. She said it was authorized. She said if I didn't follow through, I wouldn't be needed anymore. He paused, eyes scanning the room. I have 2 kids. That was enough. One of the board members stood, another followed, papers shuffled. Someone whispered to someone else and shook their head. This needs to stop, the chair said. Now. He turned to the room. Anyone who has experienced missing deliveries should submit a written statement, tonight, before you leave. Hands started going up, not tentatively, not quietly. Confessions spilled out, packages, dates, items, patterns. I watched people realize they weren't alone, that the unease they'd carried privately had been shared by the person sitting 2 rows away. That silence had been the last thing holding the lie together. The board chair asked for a brief recess. In the hallway, the air buzzed. People talked in low, urgent tones. Some were angry, some relieved, some embarrassed they hadn't seen it sooner. Eric stood alone near the wall, hands clasped. I walked over. You did the right thing, I said. He nodded once. I should have done it sooner. You did it when it mattered, I said. He looked at me then, eyes tired. She made it sound normal. I understood that too well. When the meeting reconvened, the board chair didn't sit. He stood. Effective immediately, he said. Karen Bennett is removed from her position as HOA president pending investigation. The association will fully cooperate with law enforcement. That last part changed the temperature in the room. Phones came out again, not to record drama, but to take notes, to photograph documents, to capture names. A woman near the back asked the question everyone was thinking. Are the police involved? The chair nodded. They will be. He turned to me. Sir, he said, would you be willing to share your materials with the authorities? I already have, I replied. That landed harder than I expected. The meeting ended shortly after, not because it was resolved, but because it couldn't continue as if it were normal. People lingered in clusters, exchanging contact information, promising to follow up, thanking one another for speaking. As I walked out into the cool night air, I saw Karen's car pull away from the lot. Fast. Headlights cutting sharply across the pavement. She didn't look back. 3 days later, a detective from the county sheriff's office called me. Calm voice, direct questions, thorough review. You've documented this very carefully, she said. That helps. Statements were collected. Storage rooms were inventoried. Online listings were examined. The case stopped being speculative and started being procedural. The HOA issued a notice to all residents acknowledging misconduct and outlining interim reforms. Package lockers would be installed. Oversight committees formed. Audits scheduled. Necessary steps. Late ones. Eric was placed on administrative leave, then quietly reinstated under new supervision. He wasn't celebrated. He wasn't punished. He was allowed to work without carrying someone else's lie. As for Karen, I didn't see her again. I heard about court dates, about charges, about a plea that took months to negotiate. But those details felt distant. What stayed with me was the sound of that room when the truth finally settled. Not the noise, but the release. The way people straightened, the way eyes met again. The system hadn't collapsed because of a trap. It collapsed because it couldn't survive daylight. And sometimes that's all justice really is. The days after the meeting were quieter than I expected. No shouting, no protests, no dramatic apologies, just paperwork. That's how real consequences usually arrive. Not with noise, but with forms, signatures, and dates circled on calendars. The sheriff's office followed up exactly when they said they would. Interviews were scheduled, statements were collected, evidence was cataloged. My files, the videos, the logs, the timestamps, were copied and returned without commentary. Professional, methodical, unemotional, which, in a way, was comforting. Karen's name disappeared from HOA emails first, then from the website, then from the mailbox slot outside the office. It was replaced by a generic label, interim administration, no explanation, no editorializing, just absence. A few weeks later, I received a certified letter confirming what everyone already knew. Charges had been filed, multiple counts. The language was precise and clinical. Theft, misuse of authority, breach of fiduciary duty. Words that sounded small until you realized how much damage they described. I didn't attend the court hearings. I didn't need to. Justice, once it's in motion, doesn't require an audience. The HOA moved faster than I expected. Package lockers were installed near the clubhouse and along the inner loop. Clear policies were published. Any enforcement action now required multiple signatures and documented cause. An external audit was announced, followed by another one 6 months later. It wasn't perfect, but it was different, and different was enough. Neighbors started talking again, not about the case, but about ordinary things: weather, work, family. The small, unremarkable conversations that signal trust returning to a place. Mrs. Turner stopped me one morning during her dog walk and handed me a card. Inside was a photo of her granddaughter holding the replacement gift, smiling wide. "Thank you," she said simply. Others nodded when they passed. A few stopped to shake my hand. No speeches, no heroics. Just acknowledgement. Eric kept his job. I saw him one afternoon fixing a broken sprinkler near the storage building. He looked lighter somehow, shoulders less tight, movements less careful. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. As for Karen, I heard she moved before the case concluded, sold the house, left quietly, no farewell, no explanation. Her porch lights were off the last time I passed. The house looked smaller without her in it, not diminished, just ordinary, which, I realized, was the point. Power only looks impressive when it's unchallenged. Once it's exposed, it shrinks to its true size. One evening, weeks later, a delivery driver knocked on my door instead of leaving a package on the porch. "Figured I'd make sure this one got to you," he said with a half smile. I thanked him and closed the door, holding a small box that had taken on far more meaning than it should have. I didn't rush to open it. I set it on the table, made coffee, and sat down. There was no die, no camera, no trap, just a delivery. That felt like progress. I've thought a lot since then about how easily this could have gone the other way, how close I came to paying the fines, staying quiet, convincing myself it wasn't worth the trouble. That's how systems like this survive, not through force, through fatigue. They count on people choosing peace over truth, quiet over confrontation, moving on over standing still and asking why. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I paid attention, I documented, I waited. And when the moment came, I spoke. That was enough. Justice didn't arrive because I was angry. It arrived because the story was complete. And when a story is complete, when the facts line up and the lies have nowhere left to hide, even the most carefully constructed authority starts to crack. If there's one thing I hope people take from this, it's this. Power doesn't disappear on its own. It retreats when it's watched, and sometimes all it takes to rebalance a system is one person willing to stop looking away. I turned off the porch light that night and went inside. The neighborhood was quiet, not silent, just peaceful. And for the first time since I moved to Pinewood Heights, that peace felt real.